I'm Jonathan Larsen, managing editor, and today I wanted to talk about Trump's comments yesterday when he was asked to respond to the uproar over his tweets, where he suggested that four members of Congress, four women of color, Democratic women of color in Congress, should leave the country and go fix the places they came from. And I talked a little bit yesterday about, whether it matters that three of them were born here or not. But yesterday he kind of doubled down on it, and he didn't use the exact phrase "America, love it or leave it," but he essentially said, he expressed the same sentiment. If you don't like it, you can leave, or even should leave. And I wanted to explore a little bit where that phrase comes from. This is something I tried to do yesterday before I did my commentary about go back where he came from. I Googled around a little bit to see if I could come up with a hard origin for it. And I failed. So if anyone found or knows anything about the history of that phrase, go back where you came from, I hope you'll share it in the comments, if only because I'm curious, but I suspect other people would be curious as well. Yesterday he used a more specific variation on that, which is America, love it or leave it. Go back where you came from has been used in other countries, right? Yankee, go home, stuff like that. So the idea of going back where you came from is a little bit more amorphous and more widely seen in history. But America, love it or leave it, obviously has American origins. And I didn't do this with the rigor of a historian, but it seems like there are enough sources online that it has some credibility that the phrase America, love it or leave it originated with a columnist, an American columnist who was very not just popular, but also influential in the 30s, 40s, 50s, a guy named Walter Winchell. There's a movie, thinly veiled, disguised, based on his life called Sweet Smell of Success, which is worth looking at, if only to dissuade you that people were naive about media back in the 40s and 50s. And Winchell is a fascinating character whose influence, whose power, really, doesn't have an analog in recent modern American history. Rush Limbaugh never reached the heights of power and influence that Walter Winchell did. Fox News might have as much power, but it doesn't have the same reach that Walter Winchell did, right? The number of people who actually watch Fox News is maybe in the low double-digit millions of regular viewers. Walter Winchell had a column that was read by tens and tens of millions of people. He had a radio show that was listened to by tens and tens of millions of people at a time when the population of the country was much smaller. The guy's influence was such that it mattered when he was, in his earlier days, he was a big supporter of the New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then later on, and also, by the way, he was an opponent of isolationism going into World War II. He took down people who were objecting to America getting involved in World War II. He was anti-fascist. Later on, after World War II, he became much more focused on being anti-communist, and that ended up proving his downfall. But his influence, at least going into that period, was still such that Josephine Baker, for instance, famous American-born singer, was not able to return to the country for years, basically because Winchell branded her a communist, un-American, all that kind of thing. So she was denied a visa to return. He also, the phrase America, love it or leave it originated, apparently it seems, or was at least popularized, when Winchell came to the defense of Senator Joe McCarthy. And if you're not familiar with Joe McCarthy, the Reader's Digest version of it is, he went on a communist witch hunt. He popularized the idea that there were communists everywhere within the US government, secret moles, feeding information to the Soviet Union, trying to bring down America. He had his famous list of supposed communists who were inside the State Department. He was one of, if not the main driving force behind the blacklists. Again, if you're not familiar, lots and lots of people lost their jobs, were blacklisted from their industries, lost their careers because they were suspected of communism. And by of communism, what I mean is believing in some things that are consistent with communist ideology, which, by the way, is not illegal, but was so was seen as so inextricable from the Soviet Union, which was, of course, our Cold War ally at the time, that it was inexcusable in the public sphere, precisely because Joe McCarthy was out there saying that they represented an existential threat to the United States of America. Now, Winchell, I think it's important to make a couple points about Winchell. Winchell enjoyed basically Trump levels of popularity, and he also went after people personally, tried to destroy them on a personal level. He even went so far as to give his enemies, or the people he did not like, nicknames, stupid nicknames, all in the process of pursuing his intertwined political and personal interests, right? His political interests were intertwined with his career interests. So, and it all became one to him, right? The state, l'état c'est moi, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. But the idea is that the Trumpian idea that I am the government, I am the state, same thing with Winchell in his career. And what I think is important and useful and maybe even hopeful about the fact that Trump is using this Walter Winchell idea and so many other aspects of Walter Winchell is that Winchell failed. McCarthyism reached an extreme that the American people eventually rejected. And as McCarthy went down, and as his vile, obscene, un-American way of dealing with threats and enemies and reality came to be exposed for what they were, and more people began to see it for what it was, and frankly, to escape from the fear, right? That's what it's about. It's about fear-mongering. Fear makes you do stupid things, right? That's why we have terrorists, to make us do stupid things. So as McCarthy went down, so did Walter Winchell. And so I think it's horrifying and depressing and sad to see an American president embrace the tactics of both Joe McCarthy and Walter Winchell, but it's heartening in the sense that they both failed. Okay, so thanks for sticking around. I saw that a bunch of comments went by while I was blathering on there. I am, again, still going on too long. I promise I'll continue. I'll try to work on it. But for the moment, let me see what you guys have to say about this topic. Chris mentioned, I was talking to Chris MC or Chris Mick, I don't know how to pronounce it, calling AOC a socialist. I'm gonna side table that one and stick on the Trump love it or leave it stuff. Chris, if you have additional stuff you want to address on that, I did ask you to follow up, so I hope you'll put it in the comments. Okay. Shayla says she's annoyed by the fact, excuse me, I shouldn't assume that Shayla is a she. Shayla is annoyed by the fact that the squad explicitly said in their press conference not to take the bait of getting sidetracked by Trump's blatant racism, but to continue to focus on policy, yet mainstream media has largely totally taken the bait, although I'm heartened that they finally are starting to just call it racism. So Shayla, I'm kind of excited that you said this, because I thought that specifically today, not because the squad said it in their press conference, but because I think about it a lot. This tension between pouring gasoline on the fire and wanting to push back, right? That's always a tension. And the reality is, in what we do at TYT, more people respond to and engage with and watch our content when we talk about the stupid racist stuff that the president says than when we talk about policy. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle. We're incentivized, right? We have lots of incentives to talk about that stuff. And I feel bad about it when we do. And I try to look for areas of policy to talk about. For instance, there was one story I saw in the Wall Street Journal about how predatory lending is now moving into the rental market, where there are companies now being set up to essentially give you a loan to pay your rent that month at rates as low as 20%. So there's a lot of horrific policy out there, but here's why I felt, okay, you know what? It's actually a good thing to talk about these comments today. One is because I felt that the history the Walter Winchell origins I was talking about earlier actually matters and actually is a salient thing for us to know and think about as we consider what he has said. The idea that this is something that's, if not cyclical, a recurring feature in the American discourse and one that we have overcome in the past. And I think that's an important thing for people to know. But here's the other thing. I posted earlier the sort of complete video of Trump talking about it. And it's worth watching the whole thing, mostly because then we get the clicks. But also because at the very end, let me back up. It's worth watching because he's taking the questions at the end of a big White House event to tout Made in USA manufacturing efforts, including an executive order about how much stuff in products that's labeled Made in USA has to actually be made in the USA. So then he opens the floor to questions, and it's all of this stuff about his stupid tweets. And then at the end, you see him kind of shuffle off to the desk where he's going to sign the executive order, and he's off mic now, but you can still hear it at the end of the video, where he complains that he didn't get any questions about manufacturing. And so my point is that the left, I think, often thinks that engaging in his rhetoric distracts from the policy issues that the left wants to talk about and wants to focus on. And I shouldn't even just say the left. Serious substantive journalists across the board, I think, share that in common. I would prefer to be talking about that kind of stuff myself. But it also means that Trump's message isn't getting through. He's been extraordinarily lucky to be riding the wave, and if you look at the trend lines from before he took office, there's no Trump blip, right, where things really get rocket fueled into overdrive when he comes into office. It's essentially he's riding the same steady ascent that began under President Obama. So he's been very lucky in that, but his ability to take credit for that is hampered by his own distraction. So he's not getting his message through either. And so I guess, Sheila, if your point is that from the question of political strategy, it's not good to give oxygen to his racist fires, I think that's kind of an open question, given that he's not able to get his message through either. I guarantee you there are messaging people at the White House who are just chewing their teeth down to a nub with frustration at not having been able to drive a day of political media about his successes in the manufacturing arena. Okay, let's see. Joseph, okay. Tressa Dunham says, I fear that if the government, Dems and reps don't demand accountability and decency, then we will continue in this destruction of our democracy even after Trump leaves. Yeah, that's fair, I think. But Dems and reps, our government, I think, are just the spear tip. The force holding the spear is the people, right? And when we clamor for Dems and reps and other politicians to hold someone accountable, there's no mechanism in American civics for holding someone accountable for rhetoric that you find vile, right? Joseph McCarthy wasn't arrested. Donald Trump isn't going to be arrested for saying racist stuff. The accountability is politics, right? So if you want to disincentivize people from either saying this stuff or countenancing it, as so many Republicans have been doing, then the mechanism for accountability is organizing. And I don't just say the vote, it's organizing, right? Because the vote sort of suggests that accountability only happens once every 2 or 4 or 6 years. But our political engagement isn't supposed to be a recurring thing. It's supposed to be a constant thing. We're supposed to be engaged constantly. And so it's on us, right? If we want accountability, we have to be engaged. And if our numbers aren't enough, then our engagement has to mean getting other people to be engaged and getting them to care about it and educating sometimes. Literally just explaining, here's why this matters. Walter Winchell tried this back in the 50s in support of Joe McCarthy to destroy innocent people's lives, and we can't let that happen again. Explaining the process of dehumanization that leads to people being in cages and abused and tortured, right? That we have to speak up at all of those stages, not just every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. DLJ says the root of the issue concerns the conflicting views that A, the U.S. and I think I just lost your comment. The U.S. is an ideal, or B, we the people, or C, we a subset of the people. I think I lost your train of thought there. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not following what you're saying there. So Chris says, did he say country or no? Meaning Trump. Did Trump say country? And at some point, yeah, he did say countries, but it was vaguely worded, and but Trump could very easily have said, I did not mean that they should go back to their countries. I was not talking about Ayanna Pressley or Rashida Tlaib or whomever. He's pretty explicitly confirmed that he was talking about Ilhan Omar, who did come from another country. So he has these, he's vague and imprecise with his language, and so it's true. Sometimes people do misinterpret. I personally, I hope you guys aren't going to get mad at me, but his whole thing with Megyn Kelly and blood coming out of her wherever, I didn't think it was clear that it was that he was making a reference to her menstruation or anything like that. I didn't think that was clear, and I thought the media went a step too far in saying that had to be what it meant. And the danger in that is that you end up, you risk alienating and losing the trust of people who, I think fairly, say, wait a minute, that's ambiguous. We're not entitled to say, oh, I know what he meant. You might know what he meant, but you're not entitled to say it if you are the media. That's not a privilege. That's not a privilege that the media have. They have an obligation not to say what they know, but to say what journalism can stand behind. So I think you're right, and I actually made that point yesterday, Chris, that there was some ambiguity. However, he did say countries, and he did use that word. He didn't name who he was talking about, but he's also got the biggest bully pulpit in the world. So if he wants to clarify or say, no, I didn't mean them, go right ahead, Mr. President. Be clear about that. He hasn't done that, so I think at a certain point it's fair to hold him accountable for the implications there. Okay, let's see what else. How is it? No Middle Ground says, how is it legal for Trump to outright attack sitting U.S. congresspersons? Well, it's legal because of the First Amendment, right? I would say it should be legal. As a journalist, I am a First Amendment absolutist. I think people should be allowed to say virtually anything, including some things that aren't true, including some things that might incite violence. These are prices that we decided with the founding of our country that we were willing to pay because we believe in free expression. So, unbalanced people or unhappy people might take action based on things that people say, and there should be some line of accountability. I'm not saying there's no line, but just the simple fact that, if I say President Trump's a bad president, and then someone says that they went out and did something because of that, that doesn't mean that I was irresponsible. That said, Trump's accusations that Ilhan Omar, for instance, is an Al-Qaeda sympathizer and hates America, I believe he explicitly said hates America, those are near, if not across that line that I'm talking about, where any reasonable person could see how someone in the position of the president could incite someone to take action based on that. And he himself was asked at that news conference whether or not he was troubled by the possibility that people would read his original comments that way, and he said no because a lot of people agree with me. Well, that's not a defense. A lot of people believe lots of different conflicting things, and the idea that some people might agree with you has no bearing on whether you should say it or not, at least in terms of its factuality and the responsibility of it. In fact, the fact that people agree with him argues against him saying it precisely because he's admitting there is an audience for this kind of irresponsible untruth that might act on it. So when he says, I know there are people out there who agree with this, and then he says, and that's what makes it okay for me to say this to them, he's essentially acknowledging the existence of the fact set that you need that creates the environment in which someone's going to do something illegal, criminal, or violent against one of these members of Congress. And he's acknowledging, knowing that the fact pattern is all there. I may have talked myself out of into agreeing with you. I don't know enough about the law to know this, but certainly I think if someone were to do something, there might be civil liability after the fact. I don't know whether the president enjoys special protection under the law. For instance, members of Congress, when they're speaking on the floor, they enjoy there's a certain bubble of legal protection that accrues to members of Congress and what they say there. I don't know whether something similar applies to the president, but in theory, if you go out and say someone, and you accuse someone of saying, you accuse someone of hating America and of being an Al-Qaeda sympathizer, and you know, because you acknowledge that there are people out there who agree with and believe this, and that you are therefore endorsing and elevating and amplifying their opinion, and then someone does something about it, it seems to me you've just now admitted to accepting responsibility for the outcome of that rhetoric. All right, I should probably wrap this up soon because I am yammering on and on. No middle ground response, First Amendment point taken, but this seems very different. The POTUS threatening them passively. Yeah, so I think I talked myself into kind of maybe agreeing with you, but I'm not sure what that would look like in terms of its enforcement. Milo says, I made it, good morning. Daniel Norman says, don't agree with you. The phrase, go back where you came from, is the phrase used by racists, and it is about going back to your country you came from. So I think I said that, or at least I meant to, so I apologize, Daniel, if I gave the opposite impression. Go back where you came from certainly can be a racist phrase. I don't think it always necessarily has to be. Again, like I said, it occurs in different contexts and even in different countries. It's been said, Yankee go home was something you saw in, I think, Latin or South America, I'm guessing in Vietnam as well. So sometimes it's also meant institutionally in response to very specific policy outcomes and that are being inflicted on other countries and other peoples. So in that case, I don't think it's necessarily racist, but it certainly could be, and it could be racist against, an individual white person in a country that, if there were one, that America had not screwed up. But I think in this case, when you're talking to 4 women of color, because you disagree with them, I think it's fairly clear that that's a racist use of the phrase. And I certainly agree with you, Daniel, that its usage in this country is sort of inextricably bound up with racism. So I apologize if I was unclear on that. No middle ground says C, so I assume that's you saying told you so, in which case fair enough. G Spike says, getting big money on the stock market, it's just a distraction to mess with these people in Congress. Oh, sorry, you said something earlier. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not following. No middle ground says, it is a very racist phrase as of the Civil War. Go back to where you came from. Yeah, and actually, I looked up the whole repatriation movement, and that was certainly my guess as to where it came from, meaning the idea after the Civil War, there was a lot of sentiment around the idea that, well, black people, freed slaves, either won't be able to make it here, or the converse, they'll be such an economic threat that we don't want them here. But in either case, let's send them back to Africa, regardless of whether they themselves were born here or not, or have family here, or have ties, or want to stay here. There was also a significant portion of the black community that looked into that as well. But I just wasn't able to sort of definitively nail down that that's where the nation of go back where you came from came from. My guess is more than one indigenous person in the United States thought that, under President Andrew Jackson or any number of others as well. No Middle Ground says, sigh, I feel better now. History applied. Yeah, I mean, I think I liked to, it was, I guess, many years ago now that I finally read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And I like to think of myself as fairly schooled in American history, but there's a lot of mind-blowing stuff in there that we virtually never learn about. The Tulsa race riots, things along those lines. And even outside of race. I was working at ABC News when we had the Columbine school shooting and things like that, and everyone was saying it's the worst school incident of school violence and all of this. And it turned out that in the early 1900s, someone blew up a school in Bath, Michigan. I don't remember if it was dozens of people killed, but it was something like that. So history is a tricky thing, I think. I don't think we necessarily actually need it to get to right answers here, or in general, but it's useful, I think, when we want to know how do situations like this, how can they end, and what causes them to end. So I do think it is helpful, and in this case, I thought it was important for people to have a sense of how these phrases get used. Go back where you came from, love it or leave it. What do they mean, and sort of how have they fared historically, right? If you look at the people who have said, I mean, here's one thing I would say. If you're a fair-minded, open-minded person who actually thinks if someone doesn't love America, they should leave, and there's a certain base logical appeal to that, right? If you don't like where you are, go somewhere else. So if you actually subscribe to that, if you are enthralled to the appeal of that phrase, America, love it or leave it, or go back where you came from, what I would ask you to do is go and look at who has said that in the past, why they said it, what cause they were attempting to pursue when they said it, and how it worked out for them. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I'll try to take a look at the dialogue in the comments, because I've missed most of it and I feel bad about that. So in the chat box, I mean. And I hope you'll join us again every day here at TYTI Daily. If you aren't already, I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us, and follow us on Facebook as well, TYT Investigates. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, guys. Bye.